Welcome to the VP Marketing Show, a podcast that takes you deep inside high-performing marketing teams to learn what they do, how they do it, and how they get better every day. We cover strategy and execution, brand and demand, metrics and team structure, today's realities, and tomorrow's opportunities. If you lead a marketing team, you aspire to the top job, or you're a CEO who hires and manages a VP marketing, this is the podcast for you. This episode of the VP Marketing Show is a bit of a departure in two ways. First, because I'm joined by two guests rather than one. And secondly, because we spend the entire time on one topic, account-based marketing. Today's guests have a great story to share. They're several years into their ABM journey, and it's a key element of their very successful move up market, way up market. They've nailed a lot of things that too many companies either overlook or fail to get right. Deep sales and marketing alignment, simple, clear objectives and metrics, leveraging the power of peer-to-peer outreach, doing things that don't scale, personalization that builds real relationships, and much more too. My guests are Evan Little, leader of the growth marketing team, and Steve Dinner, who's held a number of leadership roles in sales ops and business development at enterprise healthcare platform League. If ABM is important to you, this is a critical episode. Please welcome Evan Little and Steve Dinner from League. Guys, I am super excited to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
There's a lot of brand awareness of League, but it's not universal. There are some people who don't know who you guys are and what you're doing. So how about you give us a little bit of an overview for context?
Sure. So League's based out of Toronto, Ontario. We're in the employee benefits space. We're coming up on 300 employees now. League's on a mission to consumerize health and benefits for employers. So you can kind of think of League as the front door to your employee healthcare experience. So we work with companies like KPMG, Unilever, Uber to modernize their benefits experience for their employees and really make it health-centric for everyone who's using it every day.
And I know from our previous conversations that ABM has become a real core competency and a real key way that you guys go to market. How long have you been on that journey and why did that begin?
Yeah, so it's been over 2 years, really. If you start at the very beginning, Steve and I have worked together for a long time now. League has very rapidly changed its approach and its go-to-market strategy, moving up market from a much smaller size company as their target to a much larger one. And so we've had to adapt our go-to-market strategy, our demand generation playbook, our BDR strategy to accommodate this new enterprise target. The playbook we were running before just wasn't working anymore. So we've been on this journey for a long time. And it was really last summer, I would say, where we realized that we had a bit of a problem. We had to address it. And the solution that came out was an ABM solution, which was Steve's team and my team working together in coordination to target larger accounts, which ultimately led to some pretty big success that we're happy to talk to over the last 12 months.
And when you guys talk about going up market, you're not fooling around, right? Your ACV has gone way up over the last few years.
So when we started, I think there were people working a below 10 employee band for territories. And right now, nearly all of our reps are working above 1,000 employee companies. So it's a pretty significant shift, different business challenges, different types of buyers, different buying committees, things like that you need to take into consideration. So it was a little bit iterative. It happened over time and there was a few jumps up market between then and where we are now, but it definitely required a drastic change in our playbook.
One of the things that I took away from our first conversation was that your move to ABM was both cause and effect of going up market. That if I got the story right, ABM enabled you to go up market more quickly and more effectively, but it also was necessary because all of a sudden in these larger organizations, you were dealing with far more stakeholders, far more complexity, much more robust deals. And so ABM not only helped you move up market, but you couldn't have done it otherwise.
Totally. Essentially what we often talk about is this patio meeting that Steve and I had last summer, where it came to a head where the things we were doing, the playbooks we were running from a demand gen standpoint, they just weren't working anymore because the business had changed so much. And so that's when we sat down and we talked through what would this look like if we were to launch something like this and move to ABM. It really was, like you said, it was necessary in order for us to penetrate that market, and it was really important for us to get on the same page there. What was great about it is that we didn't really know what was going to happen, especially last summer. I feel like even the last 12 months, ABM has come a long way in terms of the content out there and the different resources you have to launch. But back then, we didn't actually know if this was going to work or not. And we put everything we had behind it. We got our teams super aligned to launch it, and it ended up being super successful for us, which was amazing. It didn't happen overnight, but it really did. In terms of our growth and our pipeline generation strategy, it was super critical in the end.
It was one of those things where at the time you'd go and you'd try and read or hear someone speak about ABM, and it was a lot of smoke. And so there was a lot of uncertainty when we first got started, but ultimately everybody's got something in their sales cycle or in their business that makes things a little bit tougher. And for us, we essentially had kind of two consulting teams. We had a solutions consulting team and a benefits consulting team, because benefits are such a big part of the product. So given that investment up front in the sales cycle and the amount of work that we had to do as a sales unit and as a go-to-market unit, we really needed something that was going to bring us the best accounts that were worth our time, because we didn't have any problem generating interest from our regular outreach channels and our regular growth channels. But the issue was, how do we control for size? How do you control for size when you're getting clicks and when you're sending out those emails and things like that? So and title and quality. And so this was something that let us kind of zero in on size and quality and the type of person we were speaking to.
A lot of companies have false starts with ABM. Like you said, they come back from a conference or they read a book and they're all fired up and this is going to be awesome. And it's not. They run into problems out of the gate. It seems that you guys navigated those waters really effectively and started strong and have continued to grow. What did you do at the beginning to increase your likelihood of success on this new journey?
I think this is something we saw, and it's really, really common for companies who give this a shot. It gets way too overcomplicated because it is a bit of a beast when you think about it objectively, of coordinating sales, coordinating marketing. You're trying to figure out the best way to track it and prove the success. But at the start, it's pretty heavy from how much is required from getting the channels going, getting your different outreach pieces together and the playbooks. It's a lot more complicated than just a standard demand generation or marketing campaign. So something I think that we did do really well was we just focused on one thing to start, with just one metric that we wanted to impact. And we chose a metric that would be super visible, for one, and would also allow us to know the performance of the campaign really early on. There are a ton of metrics that people use, like meeting acceleration, velocity, win rate, things like that. We decided to focus on percent meetings booking. And we knew that our baseline, if we were to target 100 accounts normally in our outbound strategy, we would book about 10% of those. So 10 meetings for every 100. So when we started this out, we tried to focus on what would be a reasonable jump if we were to invest in this program on just that metric? Could we get it to 20%? Could we get it to 30% by doing this really personalized campaign?
The simplest way you could put it is just that, we didn't think about it as like we're building a new program that is vastly different where you need to go buy a million things. We said, okay, we're taking the old funnel approach, hoover up everything you can, sort through it, try and find something good, and flipping it. And how do you take the resources that we have now and the workflows that we have now, and then just kind of realign them towards a different goal? So, we didn't hire people really. We didn't buy tech really. We just took what we had and we kind of lined it up so that it was only trying to achieve a very specific goal, which was to break into this very specific set of accounts. We used the resources we had and a lot of elbow grease to do a lot of stuff that didn't scale. So doing personalized research on everyone. That first 100 accounts, I probably spent weeks going through and figuring out, which one of these has a subsidiary? Are these in our sweet spot from a size perspective, all the firmographic stuff, then going specifically into their site and doing really, really manual research and just trying to figure out, okay, how many of these do we have to win for this to make sense? How many of these do we have to book to make sense? And kind of putting the bet on that we could get enough in the funnel from that list, that all that manual work and kind of aligning all of our sales tech and things like that in a different way for a singular purpose was gonna have a good outcome.
And we started really small, right? We didn't go into this saying we're shifting entirely to this ABM strategy and all of our outreach is now an ABM outreach strategy. We started with a beta test of a small group of 100 accounts. We selected our top BDRs to participate in it because they were the most vocal on the team. They had the highest success rate. It was also it was a lot easier to manage like a list of 100 accounts. And we could handhold every single one of those accounts to make sure that they were getting all the different tactics we had planned. The BDRs were doing the proper outreach strategy. And we could look at by account, which ones were engaging, which ones were clicking on their emails, which ones were going to our landing pages and chatting into us, and we were booking. So that kept it really, really manageable to start out, instead of just trying to flip it on for 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever. And then once we proved the success there, it also helped for organizational buy-in, right? That all of a sudden the execs now see that what are all these logos that are coming through Slack that we're booking of these Fortune 1000 companies or whatever. It was really more impressive. They're like, wow, there's something that we're doing here that's working. How do we scale this out? How do we take it now to the next level and move to another beta or move to like a full scale launch?
Such a strong start there, right? I mean, clear alignment between marketing and sales, kind of like a little bit of a SWAT team here of some key people working on it, clarity of your objective, clarity of the metrics that you're not overcomplicating it by trying to measure 15 things, and you're also not going to wait for revenue. You're focused on something that's nearer term, so you know you're making progress. 100 really carefully chosen accounts. You didn't go for 1,000, as you said, but you also didn't go for 10 because then, hey, you might just fail due to poor account choice. I mean, it sounds to me like you did a lot of things really smart there. What did it look like before we move ahead to how you scaled and all this kind of, what did the actual plays look like? So now that you've laid those foundations, you've got your 100 accounts, what did they see and hear from League?
So you had 3 or kind of 4 channels actually going out. So there'd be a channel from marketing going to kind of every person in the account through Pardot, and I can let Evan take that over in a little bit. But the other 3 channels were more of sales type channels. So we had the CEO to CEO channel. And so our CEO, Mike, he's a really good sport with helping out with demand generation for sure. We actually had this book that was floating around our office, and it was called The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream. It was literally written for CEOs to give them a perspective on how they need to manage their healthcare spend within their organizations. So what we did was we had Mike go through and kind of pick out some of his favorite points in the book. And then we took his notes there and we wrote on sticky notes, and we got 100 copies of this book. We wrote his notes on the sticky notes, placed them in the appropriate sections of the book, packed it up with a letter from Mike with essentially the letter was saying, hey, CEO to CEO kind of conversation style. If you're like me, you know that it's super important to always be learning and reading as a CEO, but also, you know, we're limited on time. So I've gone through and I've picked out some of my favorite parts of this book, and hopefully you enjoy it. And so we would have a follow-up email going out from Mike as well. And often we'd get a reply with the CHRO, Chief People Officer, CC'd on it. So that was an effective channel, like a 2-touch channel. And then our account executives and BDRs each had their own sales loft cadence that kind of had a bunch of different pieces to it. So we were using video, we were using in-mails, we were using custom landing pages. I'll let Evan talk about that because I didn't really touch the landing pages.
Yeah, so I think an important point here is we did try and turn on as many different channels as possible. Some were easier to scale than others. Definitely the book was a really high touch thing for us to get off the ground. But for our landing pages, it was pretty easy for us to make dynamic landing pages using Unbounce or using Pardot landing pages or whatever that would just bring in the logos. And I think an important point here is that it was a lot of streams running in parallel. It wasn't just sequential, like this had to happen, then this, then this. We were trying to, like one of the important stages before we launched an account into ABM was doing all the research, but also all the contact build out. So identifying the CHRO, identifying the people who reported up to them in the benefits function, the CEO, the CFO, all of that. And then thinking through who makes sense to engage with that person. Because it's not necessarily the BDR who should be engaged with all those different personas. Marketing might be one, definitely wants to be doing some air cover of a personalized outreach email. And then the direct mail, there might be one that's more appropriate for the CEO, like Steve talked to, and another one for the CHRO. But it's really important, like who is sending that? Like if a CHRO receives something from a BDR, it doesn't have near the impact as if they receive it from a CHRO on our side, talking about the challenges that, in our case, that she is experiencing, trying to maintain their people culture and their benefits experience. And for the CEO, they're facing real healthcare challenges, particularly in the US right now, with rising costs and lack of engagement and things like that. So I think it's really important to think through not just what we're sending, but who we're sending it to and who is sending it. So all those things kind of had to come together. We definitely just tried to, like as Steve often says, like we just tried to throw the kitchen sink at them, which was everything we had. Let's try a bunch of channels. We'll test and see what works and what doesn't work, what scales, what doesn't scale, and go from there. And I think we just got a lot of great data back off that first beta test.
Yeah, I guess my term doesn't really imply elegance, but like if you situate all of the things in the timeline correctly, then it works, because you can't be doing all of it at once. So it does need to be well timed. Especially once you start going after accounts that are clearly the best fit or the most desirable for your organization, you have to bet that there's companies out there doing the same, and probably most of them, whether by targeting that company or just generally having them be a recognizable name. So you got to figure out how you can stand out. And so something like the book, or going to a direct mail strategy where people are kind of moving away from that type of thing now, anything physical, was necessary to get noticed, because you're swimming in more crowded waters there.
I absolutely love those things. I love the peer-to-peer nature. I think that is something that is missed in so many ABM programs, that they'll do all this research, have this great ideal account identification, I'll have all these complex cadences and this great creative platform and all this kind of stuff, and then all the communication either comes from the brand or it comes from a BDR or a sales guy. I love the fact that you went CEO to CEO and CHRO to CHRO. I think that is gotta be one of the reasons why you were so successful. And I think another thing that you did so well there was the really high touch. I mean, the book play is brilliant, right? Having your CEO mark up one book, then you guys scale that to 100, and it goes out as this like, wow, who does that, right? Everybody's getting peppered with emails and LinkedIn requests and all kinds of stuff. And you land a book and a letter on a CEO's desk. I mean, well played.
Yeah, I mean, like, even if you, for some reason, disliked us just outright and you weren't going to listen to anything we had to say, like, if you're a CEO and that book lands on your desk, like, there's no way that's not valuable to you. So there's a genuine aspect to it too, right? Because these are Mike's thoughts as a CEO. So this is one of your peers, a very successful one at that. Thoughts about, an area of in your purview that you don't spend a lot of time thinking about, that all this data is suggesting that you really should.
And then you followed in. So you've had the peer-to-peer, you've had the high touch, you're doing the things that don't scale, you're getting on their mental radar, let's say. Now I believe BDRs and others started getting involved here. And my memory correct that you leveraged some personalized video and some other things to make that better than it usually is?
But I think it was something that League does just generally well, and we had in place even before, was we were using a lot of tools like we're a pretty big partner with Sales Loft and leveraging those cadences and all the different steps. Our BDRs are really well trained at that and all that. But the integrations there, when it comes to like Go Video was one we used with Vidyard to send something super personalized. I think to be honest, I think that was what was really, really cool there is that we continued to build the recognition. BDR, you saw their face on our landing page being like, I'm your BDR, and for this account.
Through the landing pages.
Yeah, it's like the landing pages were a consolidation of all the research we had. So we would do all this research on this account, and we'd find out here are the things that they're most interested in, here are the challenges they're having from a people perspective or retention or whatever. And we'd call those out on the page, and it'd be from the BDR would be saying this. And so when the account would arrive on the landing page, they would see that face. They may have come in from a video of their face talking about why this would be a good fit. And then we had a Drift ABM running on all the pages where they would get a ping in Slack saying, your account is on this page. And you'd once again get a chat from that BDR saying, hey, I'm glad you made it. Glad you got my video. I think this would be a really great fit. And so just continuing to build that relationship between those parties.
That was one of the, so essentially we have a custom landing page for every account that we're doing. It's got their logo, it's got the BDR's face, it's got a handwritten, well, not handwritten, but like a written piece here that says why we think they'd be a good fit, case study, book a time, they're getting a chat. That's in every email in the cadence. So the BDRs and AEs are sending that out. If anyone's clicking on those links, we're getting notifications. We're trying to engage with them in a conversation right there. It is a lot. Like we build that, and it is pretty robust, I think, considering that we have custom research on every page and there's a custom link in every email that's going to a different person. But one of the things, and I really don't know how to quantify this, but a lot of these ops, like much, much later in the process, the ones that were booked by BDRs, there was just this hard to quantify aspect where like the prospects would keep mentioning the BDRs or talking about how great they were, or kind of just like there was a relationship there that you just don't see, especially after those initial stages in a regular op. So we built some credibility with the initial person who was doing the outreach, and you can speculate on that as far as you want, but it was really interesting.
That's awesome. So you started out, your baseline was 10% of these accounts would turn into meetings. What were the results after you ran this play?
So the first playbook, so we call it the ABM 100, which is our first beta test. It jumped to 22%, which was really, really cool to see. And what was great is it wasn't just 2 months later or 3 months later, let's look at the results. As they were coming in every day, like the entire BDR team and marketing team knew how we were doing it. We actually wrote out the 100 accounts on a whiteboard that was in our sales pit. And as soon as we booked one, we'd walk up and cross it off. And we'd be like, okay, it's 5%, it's 6%, it's 7%, and keep climbing. So it was pretty cool to see how that would evolve over the course of the campaign. And it ultimately netted out at 22% for the first beta. And we obviously had a ton of learnings and feedback from the team on ways it could be improved and whatever. They were now seeing this as a way for them to hit their numbers a lot easier. So they were getting the buy-in. And this is when we kind of transitioned into the next beta, which we incorporated a bunch of that feedback.
Before we go on to what's next, which is obviously what everyone wants to know, I just want to double click on one thing. So the skeptic might say, okay, so you more than doubled your meeting uptake because you did such a great job of providing value and being human. But did these deals close, or were people just, they thought you guys were buddies? What did you see in terms of ultimate win rate out of this first batch? Whether you're going to share specific numbers or not, but I mean, how did it compare to the past?
Yeah, and so I think an important thing to call out here is that the most visible metric we were doing to try and keep it simple was the meeting booking rate. In the background, we were tracking everything else. So how are the ABM opportunities doing against a regular opportunity for velocity? Were they moving faster? Were they qualifying at a higher rate because they matched our ICP and they were more engaged and the relationship existed? So were they becoming a sales qualified op faster and more often? And were the general op sizes that much larger? And so like we obviously have an enterprise sales cycle, so it took 12 months. I mean, we were following them very, very closely to watch these opportunities move through our funnel. And now they made it to late stage, or they made a proposal, and they're in negotiation. So it was very cool to see that full cycle. But it did take a full year for us to see these results, right? And so on that initial cohort, it did take until summer 2019 for them to start to come through. And I mean, if you compare that against There's probably two ways I'd answer this. The first is on an ROI perspective, on what we invested in our ABM outreach and methodology and all that, and compared against a demand generation campaign. The ROI was significantly higher than a typical webinar campaign, or I guess what I'd call a single channel campaign. And so that's probably the first bucket. The second bucket is, we got to see these close. And what was really cool about it is the BDRs and AEs were just that much more invested in the success of that logo because they put so much effort into it. And I know there's some different schools of thought on inbound versus outbound and all that. But I really think a lot of that relationship that we built and rapport through that personalized campaign and that high touch and really personalized experience, I think that it overcame a lot of that, which was able to drive to these logos ultimately closing in a year later. And we still have a bunch in the pipeline. We're still seeing those come through. It's not by any means a short sales cycle. So
it looks like not only your near-term metrics, your meetings were way up, fantastic, but thus far it looks like your full throughput and the ultimate win is materializing really well. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So where did you go next? How did you build on this success?
The next one we did is interesting because you probably wouldn't expect the sample size to get smaller, but we actually did fewer accounts. But as we thought about how we were going to scale this, we knew that we didn't have the bandwidth to be able to do this all the time. We knew that we were going to have to be able to outsource some of this manual work to reps. And we thought that the trade-off would be worth it. And so what we did was we, pulled together that group of AEs and BDRs that we were working on the first one. And we had them go through and say, these are the accounts I want for these reasons, and then do the research themselves. Just kind of playing with what it would be like to create something that was a little bit more on demand, even though this was very kind of clearly set up. And so we had similar results. Actually, we had better results with that program. So we only did 30 accounts, but we penetrated 28% of those accounts. So that was more of a, we were improving the playbook, we were tweaking things there, but we were seeing how can we build the back end of it, or the infrastructure, so that it's something that we could reasonably do without it being, our full-time jobs, because, this was an initiative that we were working on. We didn't see it as something that should be full-time for us. We wanted to figure out how can we build more things in so they're automatic? How can we work with our partners more closely and get some more efficiencies? And how do we make it so that there's a digestible amount of work that the reps can do to make this something that might be even a little bit more on demand? So that second one, similar results, a little bit better, but a smaller sample size. So I'd call them pretty similar. We learned a lot about, how we would create efficiencies in this one, because we knew that we had something that was going to work from a playbook perspective. So we kind of focused on the other pieces.
So where are you at now? How significant is ABM as a portion of your total marketing and your total business development program?
We're in a bit of a transition right now. We're probably moving into our next phase of ABM, I would say. But there's been a little bit just of a gap because some of the new content that we're creating is kind of we're waiting on. And so really what we did was we moved to an on-demand model, as I kind of alluded to earlier. So our third iteration was ABM 2019. So in January, we held a big meeting and we took the sales team through how it was going to be more automated so that they could just literally pick an account, do the right actions, and then go. So we really didn't have to do much. There was a bit of a request for some of Evan's growth team for the landing pages and to get part up set up and everything like that. But we essentially made it so easy that they could designate an account as ABM, do a bit of the legwork themselves, launch the campaign and go, because we had everything, including the books, built into Sendoso. So an AE would open or a BDR or an AE would open a Sales Loft Cadence. They could send the book from Sendoso on behalf of Mike, with the letter included, and then they could run their own cadences as well alongside it. And so that's been our playbook for most of 2019. And right now we're preparing to kind of redo this from the lens of we're going to be including, like ROI calculators and things like that, and better case studies, because, a lot of the content that we're sending right now, a lot of the content from the previous playbook has been refreshed, and then we just need to build that back in. So it's just time for us to add new content to it. I think the structure is still sound and still holds. And so that's definitely the plan for 2020. We just have bigger and better stuff as our kind of wow factor at the beginning now.
It's really interesting. You've kind of gone from a campaign focus to more of building a machine, right? You've now got an ABM process that the AEs can point at the accounts that they want to do, and it makes it a little less heavy lifting for you guys. I mean, is that a natural evolution of ABM in a lot of organizations, do you think, that you move beyond campaign centricity and into more of an always-on machine? Or is that just an experiment that you guys are running?
I think there's a lot. There can be a lot of risk associated with it, and we really spent a lot of time thinking through, like, how could this? Because you think ABM, you think you're doing things that don't scale, and at some point you're going to have to obviously try and find efficiencies. But how far can you take that while still not losing the integrity of this is a highly personalized, high touch sort of thing? So I think the majority of the pieces we were able to find a way to make more. And either with tools or just better training or things like that, or maybe having a SWAT team just focused on doing the heavy intensive research and things like that. I think where the risks come in is account selection, follow through, things like that. Like, you can't take the foot off the gas on making sure that the cadences are fully followed up with, all the different steps are running still in unison, and you're not losing that, like what we've heard called in many podcasts, that whole hand-to-hand combat aspect, where you're moving out of the aggregate and focusing on every single account and making sure it gets to the finish line. I think that's a pretty big risk, is that you all of a sudden zoom out and it's like, oh, we're just running this all the time, and you're losing track of making sure that this still feels like an ABM outreach. So that's really important. Like, we still dedicate a bunch of resources to make sure that's the case. And the second risk that I identified there was around account selection. You can't, like, we still had to put processes in place to make sure that when an account was promoted to ABMs, the AE said, I want this one included in this next campaign, it still had to be approved. So there was approvals through Salesforce that would fire to our sales leaders, be like, yes, if this one enters the pipeline, we're okay with that. Like, this is a target account. Without that, then it becomes too Wild West, and it can just kind of resort back into just an outbound strategy.
You've got to have like a bit of a common sense lens, because every time someone starts one of these cadences, it's costing you real money out of your budget, right? So send a few of those books around, and that adds up pretty quickly. So, if people aren't thinking critically, and if someone doesn't have an eye on it, then next thing you know, Google's in your ABM list, and then the book has a label on it and a shipping label for Sergey Brin, and like, it's just not going to happen, right? Like, that book's not making it to Sergey's desk. So yeah, you have to protect your investment a little bit there as well.
You want to make it a little bit self-serve, but you want to have some clear guidelines and some clear parameters, that this is not, as you said, just throw anybody and everybody in there and hope for the best. You've got to choose wisely, and you've got some work to do. So as the AE, if I want to designate a certain account, am I the one now who needs to identify all the key people and do that kind of research that you did up front? Or is there some other resource? If I'm the AE and I say, I want to go after this company, does somebody else help me with that? How does that happen?
Yeah, it depends on the point in time you're referencing, but we had people doing it at one point. We had the reps doing it at other points. Usually we still needed to have a quality control team, even if the reps were doing it directly. But I think, like, to the initial question, I love and I geek out on, better processes and automating them and making them really slick. But there was something about the campaign, I think, that was a little bit more special, just because there was a point where we were rolling them out at the beginning of every quarter. We were celebrating them in a different way. We borrowed from the college football tradition of, throwing a sticker on the helmet for every start you get. We created ABM stickers, so people are plastering their monitors and their laptops with it. We had troops notifications going through specifically for ABM, not for other types of meetings. So there's a different momentum that you can get behind it. There's a different level of throughput and things like that. So I think there's a lot to be said for keeping it as a campaign if it's something that you can do on a reasonably repeatable time frame.
And where do you guys go from here?
Well,
it's a good question. I mean, we're deep now into 2020 planning, and we actually have a new CRO who's joined the organization in the end of the summer this past year. So she's bringing in some really great changes on how we manage our territories and how we segment our different opportunities. So I would say the two biggest changes that will be probably heavily included is a local strategy. Because of the territories, and we have obviously some markets that are way more developed than others, how do we activate those less known or lesser known territories, Midwest, things like that? Like how do we engage those territories in a more kind of unique way? Because those are the specific areas that we need to get more penetration for the reps that are working them. We of course can always penetrate a Toronto account or New York or Chicago a lot easier than say something in the West. So I think that territory planning and how that local strategy comes to life in ABM is going to be a big part. And the second is the segments. Like what is the level of investment and also the playbook for an emerging enterprise like a 1,000 person company versus a large enterprise that's 20,000 employees? How does the playbook change? How do you make sure that you're still engaged with the right personas? Because different roles and contact roles come into place once you get into larger orgs. So I think those are probably a couple of things, but it's gonna be interesting. I think like particularly with ABM, it's changing really, really rapidly. Like I said, a year ago, I feel like the entire industry of ABM has jumped leaps and bounds. Because what was really unique and engaging in 2018 or 2019 doesn't necessarily land in 2020. So like, what are those new tactics?
I think what's nice is that we don't necessarily know anything groundbreaking that we're going to be doing in the next year, but we do know that the framework for what we have here can accommodate it. It's agile enough to be adjusted and fit any new things that we're doing. And whether that's messaging or outreach types and additions to the playbook or the tech stack, it really all depends. But I think that we have the flexibility built in to be able to accommodate anything new that comes up.
One final question before I let you go. As companies become more mature in their ABM, and I think you guys are clearly there or well on your road to that, some of them are building distinct ABM teams within their organization. They're hiring ABM leaders and they're building out a team of ABM marketers. And there's all sorts of debate about how many accounts should one ABM marketer handle and all this kind of stuff. Others are taking a completely different approach. And they're saying, no, we don't need an ABM team. This is just in our DNA. ABM is just smart B2B marketing. We're not going to have ABM and non-ABM people. We're just kind of all going to have this account centricity as a core part of how we go to market. Have you guys talked through that? And do you have opinions or beliefs about what the right future is for League in that regard? Let's say a year or 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think we probably fall into that second bucket.
We don't like to color in the lines anyway. So like we're pretty broad in like the things that will impact across the GTM team. So
I think we really are focused around initiatives. And I think I would probably try and avoid siloing as much as possible because it might kind of feel like this is something different. And if it sits in the marketing org, then it might send the wrong message. Whereas like for Steve and I'd be working super closely together and launching this as one thing, account-based everything. I think there's something intangible gained there. So I think we probably fall into that second bucket of what does our GTM team need to look like in 2020 or 2021 in order to achieve our goals? That might be a bunch of demand gen. It might be a bunch of ABM. It might be something completely new. I just think it's probably a little bit more agile, but you never know. Like if adoption just gets that much higher and we really realize we need to double down even further, then maybe we bring in someone just specialized on managing that campaign. I think it's an interesting question, but I think right now it's just we're really, really focused on just being as agile as possible.
I think like you say, like the message needs to be that it's not necessarily like a marketing initiative, it's a company initiative. You're essentially executing on the CEO's wish list, right? You're saying, how do we go out and get those? And it's a mentality, and it's a mentality that everyone needs to have. And that's why I think that the way that we rolled it out, starting with a few reps and then getting other people asking, hey, can I get in on that? Getting the buy-in, building the momentum across the sales team, across the GTM team, across the company. That's really important. And so I think siloing probably, you lose a little bit of the effectiveness of that, because it's one person trying to talk about how great the program that they're specifically there to run is, whereas whatever is going to get us to where we need to go is what we're going to do. And so we're able to kind of affect that mentality across a broader group of people, and I think get better results.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Not only some real clear learnings around how to do it and how to do it really well, but also some great inspiration about the way you've just incorporated this into the entire strategic focus of your organization. Beautifully done. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll come back in a year and give us the update on where you are then.
Okay. Thanks so much. This was fun.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the VP Marketing Show. We hope you'll join us next time.